So, just to like the ground rules, can you just, when I ask a question, can you repeat the question in your answer?
Okay.
So, where were you when Pearl Harbor was bombed? Just say, I was blank when Pearl Harbor was bombed. Okay. And can you please state your name, where you were born, and what year, and where
What
you
year?
lived during World War II? I know.
My name is Norm Mineta, and I was born in San Jose, California, excuse me, in 1931.
And where did you live during World War II?
Well, when we were evacuated, we first went from San Jose, California to Santa Anita, the racetrack in Southern California. And then from Santa Anita, California, we went to Hart Mountain, Wyoming. When the Army first came out with the orders for evacuation and internment, they had commandeered racetracks and county fairgrounds because they have built-in living quarters, namely the horse stables. So fortunately, by the time we got to Santa Anita on the 30th of May, 1942, all the horse stables had been occupied. So they housed us in barracks that they had built, excuse me, in the parking lot. And having visited some friends who lived in the horse stables, and this is during the summer months of 1942, and they had been assured that they had been washed out or cleaned out, but just the smell just made me very, very happy that I was not in the stables.
Okay. Oh, gross. Where were you when Pearl Harbor was bombed?
We had just come home from church. California time, it was roughly about 9, or rather, it was about noontime. And so we had just come home from church about 12:15, 12:30, and the phone was just ringing off the hook. My dad was considered a leader in the Japanese community, so a lot of people were calling him wondering, what's this we hear about Pearl Harbor, and how is that going to affect us? So I was at home at 545 North 5th Street in San Jose.
Okay. And how did your school environment change after the bombings? And did your classmates' attitudes towards you change?
After the bombings of December 7th, it really didn't change. Our school was so integrated in terms of minority, majority population. And one of the things that the San Jose Mercury News, our local hometown paper, did right after Pearl Harbor was to say, these are our friends and neighbors, so please don't do anything untowards them, because there were other communities in California where there were fire bombings, there were shootings, there were different things going on. So San Jose was pretty calm, and there wasn't this flare-up of attitude about towards the Japanese Americans, and the school we were in was made up of Mexican Americans, Italian Americans, Japanese Americans. I mean, it was Chinese Americans. It was just a great mix of people, and there was not that kind of I guess you might say, intense feelings that broke out after December 7th.
Okay. And when did you begin to realize that you and your family would be moved to an internment camp?
We probably knew that there were rumors about what was going on. Now, my parents were both immigrants from Japan, and my dad had gathered all of us in the living room of our home in January the end of January of 42, and told the five of us, the children, that he didn't know what was going to happen to them. That there were rumors that the government was going to pick up all the Issei's, the first generation who had come over from Japan. And there was a Swedish ship in Long Beach, and that they were thinking about putting them on board the Swedish ship called the Gripsholm and send them to the Far East, to the Philippines, I think specifically, for exchange for POWs. And so my dad assured the children that this home, 545 North Fifth Street, is your home. The government can't take it away from you. It's in your name, so always consider this home, even though I don't know what's going to happen to your mother and me. So there were all kinds of rumors as to what was going to happen. Then on February 19th, 1942, President Roosevelt signed Executive Order 9066, delegating to the military commander of the Western Military Civil Defense Command the ability to evacuate persons. It didn't say Japanese, Germans, Italians. It just said persons. Well, General DeWitt was the commanding general of that military district, and he always thought that if the Japanese were able to attack Pearl Harbor, they would be able to attack the west coast of the United States. And what would I do with the people in my military jurisdiction, which included Washington, Oregon, and California, roughly 120,000 people? And he suspected that if the military attacked the West Coast, that the 120,000 people of Japanese ancestry would hook up with the military forces. So these big placards started getting posted after February 19th in areas where there were larger populations of Japanese and Japanese Americans. It would say, "Attention, all those of Japanese ancestry, alien and non-alien." Who's a non-alien? It's really a citizen. But already our own government wasn't thinking of us as citizens. And that's why to this day I cherish the word citizen, because my own government wasn't willing to acknowledge me as a citizen. I was a non-alien. Now, when's the last time you stood up, proudly beat your chest and said, "I'm a proud non-alien of the United States of America"? I don't think you have. People don't do that, even though a non-alien is a citizen. So I cherish the word citizen. But after that, it became very evident that now we were going to be in evacuation and internment mode, because the General DeWitt took over all of the, not all of, took over certain racetracks and county fairgrounds because they had horse stables. So we left San Jose on the 29th of May, and then we had this overnight train ride to Santa Anita, the racetrack near Los Angeles. So we got there the next day, 30th of May.
Okay. And can you tell me about the day you were taken to your internment camp and who in your family went with you?
The day we left for the internment camp, my oldest sister had gotten married and living in San Francisco. So that just meant that my dad, my mother, two older sisters, my older brother, and me, the youngest, went off to camp on May 29th 1942. There were only 3 times I ever saw my dad cry. Once was on the 7th of December because he had come over here in 1902 by himself as a 14-year-older, and he got to love this country. And he couldn't understand why on December 7th, why the land of his birth had attacked the land of his heart. And because that really shook him up. The second time I ever saw him cry was on the 29th of May, 1942, when we were on the train pulling out of San Jose. And I looked up and saw him, and all these tears were coming down. And then he wrote to a friend of ours who had picked us up at home that day to take us to the freight yard where we boarded the trains to go off to camp. And he wrote to Mr. and Mrs. Linderoth about how he felt and the experience of now being interned behind barbed wire in Santa Anita. And he described in the letter how the hot tears came down his face. Well, the Linderoths took that letter and to the newspaper, and they published it as a story. So somewhere, I'm a pack rat, and somewhere in my belongings somewhere, I've got that article from the San Jose Mercury News dating back to probably sometime in June of 1942, describing his experience of going off to camp. And then the third time I saw my dad cry was in 1956 when my mother passed away. But he loved this country, and he, I think, well, he did get all of us as children to understand that as well.
I have a question on
Sure.
that. Was there a sense of outrage when you talk about your neighbors that he sent the letter to? Was there a sense of outrage among Americans who were friends with Japanese Americans that you all were being taken to these internment camps? I mean, what was that kind of
Sure.
public perception like?
Right. Part of the difficulties in 1942 was that as our leaders were trying to access members of the Congress, senators, mayors, no one would talk to them. I always described it as we were about as popular as skunks at a garden party, and we had no access to the leaders of our time at the time. And even the ACLU, as an organization, never protested. Now, there were individuals